Kiribati government, so all the attempts to find solution in the Czech-German national conflict. But it didn't have any positive result in terms of Bohemia, but there is a positive example of Czech-German relationships in terms of Moravia. So there is so-called Moravian Pact, in 1905, which to address the national attention between those two nations in Moravia. So just reminding you that there was land diet in Brno. The conflict was slightly different because the percentage of both population was slightly different. So the Czechs were or had the dominant majority of over 70% of population. Germans were about 30%, and they were concentrated in cities like Brno. But for instance, Brno, the historically the central part of Brno was German. But if we, for instance, count with the suburbs like Krasnopol and the others, they were typically Czechs, and that's why also the German population tried to solve or try to find kind of a solution. So it's obvious that there was a dominant Czech majority, and there was a need to find a certain solution. So Moravia lacked the continuous or contiguous territories, the German territories. So they were just we call it language isles within the Czech regions, and there was a focus on integration and less extreme demand. So there was space for a certain resolution. So there was the talks, the negotiations already started in 1898, but the momentum has been reached after 1905 Russian Revolution, which heightened calls for the universal suffrage. So there was also within the radical requirements universal suffrage as one of the dominant point, but it's necessary to say that it came as a reaction upon the situation outside of monarchy, and it was the Russian Revolution. There were key leaders on the German side. There were the moderate pragmatists like Alfred von Skene. There was Johann von Chlumetzky, conservative, but someone who got support from the emperor himself. So these were the important figures, and obviously on the Czech side, there was Adolf Stransky, one of the representatives of Young Czech Party. So Jan Žáček, Stransky were both advocates of the Czech national interest. Obviously, there were some obstacles, so there were problems. One of them had been the violent protest over Czech demands for the university. So there was a technical university since 1899, but there was a lack of another the second Czech university in Czechland, so which was supposed to be in Brno, but the German population, German representatives stopped those demands, and it has not been realized until 1918. So what were the provisions, the key provisions of the Moravian Pact? So there was proportional representation in the curia system of Landtag. So there were division between the urban municipalities as well as the trade chambers. So both were represented by Czech Germans, and also there was a mixed part. Same with the rural municipalities, because of the obvious dominance of Czechs in rural regions. There were more Czechs than Germans, and also same proportion in universal suffrage. Curia, where was the least number of seats, but there was Czech dominance as well. So there was a status quo which had been accepted by German side, and for obvious reasons. So if the population was twice smaller, or at least twice more than the Czech one, it would be better to have kind of agreement. There was also a space for culture administrative autonomy based on two lexes, Lex Parma, so which allowed municipalities to choose the official language, requiring bilingualism if minorities exceeded 20%. So 20% for Germans, okay. So there was a bilingualism accepted. And Alex Perec established a separate education system, national preferences. So there were schools with the Czech and German teaching language, and the numbers were rising in comparison to the 1860s and 70s, when there was still criticism of low number of Czech schools. So there was also a principle of personal autonomy introduced here. So there was no territorial division, but there was a priority of individual national language rights. So which might have been a better choice than all those Gauge and Badenese ideas or Toom's ideas how to divide the Bohemia. So there were no territorial divisions. It's necessary to say that Germans retain minority protection, which was quite useful in terms of their political role. They avoid the consequences of universal suffrage. What does it mean? It seems to be obvious that the universal suffrage would harm the situation of German representation. It would be much lower than it was, so at least they see and they save preserved a certain number of seats, which were slightly more disproportionate than it would be under the universal suffrage. So the agreement, the pact, was a model for our regions like Bukovina, where it also happened in 1910. But there were limited influence in Silesia and obviously Bohemia. So interesting is the outcomes after election 1906. The Czechs got the dominance. So Czech parties got 73 seats, but it wasn't that bad for Germans as well. So almost 50 seats there. And there were landowners who were losing in the historical development, but still they got 31 seats. So it was a pragmatic approach emphasizing the coexistence, but the situation was in future developing better for the Czech population. As I mentioned, the Moravian success, the negotiation of such a settlement very much contrasted with Bohemia, where both sides were in a stalemate and there was no development until the end of the pre-war era. So that's one of the positive examples. The situation in Moravia had been solved without introducing universal suffrage. But what's happened on the Vienna level? There was the end of Curia parliamentarism, and 1907 in Cisleithania there was introduced universal male suffrage. That's necessary to say. There was only for men over 20 years old. Why 20 years old? 24 years old is the age for adulthood in Austrian Empire, based upon the civil code from 1812. So here is the beautiful building of Vienna Parliament, where all those elected representative got seated. So the curious system favored the wealthiest classes and certain ethnic groups, obviously Germans and those who were middle or higher class origin, and was marginalizing broader representation at certain point after development in Russia and everywhere else. Also in Belgium, there was a need to introduce, under the pressure of social national movement, certain electoral reform. What were the pushes for reform? Some of them were already mentioned. So the Russian Revolution, also young Czechs were advocating the universal suffrage since their Nymburk program. But it was also earlier advocation, and the situation also tends to be historically in favor of broader representation since revolutionary year 1848. So the system of the December Constitution failed to secure the universal suffrage, with the introduction of the fifth, Curia, it has slightly developed. So there was a space for such changes, especially after Russia granted universal suffrage, and Cisleithania had to deal with the new situation, which developed by the Eastern Ally. So there were certain steps towards reform. So Gauch government initially resisted universal suffrage, but was forced to act after widespread strikes in November 1905, promised a proposal of electoral reform. Then came the Beck's government. So Max Vladimir von Beck introduced revised bill to the Reichsrat, and it was passed by Chamber of Deputies and Lords. So in January 1707, under the imperial pressure. So there was the universal suffrage for men, those who were 24 plus. Some groups were excluded. So a military person has some history documents for it, practical as well. So those without at least their residence, so they were those newcomers, someone who, from the theoretical point of view, didn't know what the political situation is, who to vote for, and so on, and individuals who were deprived of civil rights due to criminal conviction. So it means the criminals. So criminal also because of theoretical reasons were not allowed to vote. So Curia system has been abolished on Vienna level, and it was substituted by direct election, so increased number of deputies. So the Reichsrat, so the Vienna Parliament had 516 deputies, and it consists of 130 Czech seats, almost 50 Moravian seats, and 15 Silesian seats. The inequalities continued. So we can see that the Italian and German, especially German-speaking constituencies had been favored. So we can see the correspondence. So 55,000 people in Czech deputy were represented by one member of parliament. In German areas, it was only 40,000 people who were necessary to elect one MP. So electoral safeguards were introduced as well. So there were penalties for bribery, coercion, misinformation during elections. So also the process of electing MPs was regulated. So there has been impact and limitation. So it has been seen as a huge democratic milestone. So it marked the end of the curial parliamentarism, and there was advance in terms of democracy. So it has been example of public pressure which came from below, and the government reaction, and also acceptance of the international situation, which changed after 1905. So ethnic and political division. So there was increase of autonomy demands, especially among Slavic representative Czechs as well. And there was German nationalist opposition, which was against reforms because they feared to lose their influence, which was based upon over-representation in a parliament. From my point of view, what I see as the greatest disadvantage of this development was exclusion of women. So women, even though they signed the petition, they were excluded from the system. It's necessary to say that the curia system on a land level allowed women to vote, but only those who had inherited huge property, so especially the landowners. So what was the situation among young Czechs? So the Czech party underwent certain changes during the time before the general suffrage had been introduced. We can mark a certain departure of old leaders. Some of the veterans died, left, passed away. Important figures like Eduard Gregor, so after Julius, who died. Also, Eduard Gregor left the party, Jan Slavík, also, and the others. So the new leadership consists of those guys we can see here in those pictures. So important figures like Bedřich Pacák or František Fiedler, those who became also members of Vienna government. I was actually one of those young radicals who became pragmatic politician, but also Karel Kramář, a former realist. Okay, so if we have a look up on some of them, so Bedřich Pacák, a lawyer, one of the legal theoretical, someone who translated Machiavelli's Prince, but also advocate of civil rights and Czech cultural interests. He had the position of chairman of parliamentary club, and he became also minister under Max Beck. Karel Kramář, figure highly important for further development, the future first prime minister of Czechoslovakia, so someone who shifted towards so-called positive politics. So positive politics mean cooperation with government when it was in favor of Czech, and it was the intention to go against the hostility which may occur against Czechs. So his vision was balancing the aspiration for national sovereignty with practical advancement for Czech society. As I mentioned, there were the others. So advocates František Fiedler, an excellent student, professor of law, who were advocating monarchism and also very practical economic approach. Alois Rašín, the former radical, one of the marginal leaders, and also journalist and great historian, Zdeněk Václav Tobolka. So what were the challenges for the party? So universal suffrage obviously harmed the party in terms of their representation. So it was favoring the others, so especially agrarian, socialists, and the party electorate base has changed. So universal suffrage damaged their supporters base, which was typically urban middle class people. So those voters changed their preferences, or they remained, but it was not enough with the general suffrage, where the people from countryside, working class, were also important. So Young Czech Party retained their strength in Bohemia provincial assembly, so it means the Czech and the Diet. The reasons are obvious, because there was a curious system retained, and also it favored them in comparison to Vienna parliament. So they lost the ability to be the party of a nation, but they still got the dominant role, especially inside of Bohemia. So the new leader, Karel Kramář, adopted the approach which I already mentioned, so positive politics as a core strategy, and he tried to integrate young intellectuals from the progressive realist movement somehow to revitalize the party. So what's happened with the national newspapers? They were under control of party and left the radicalism. It has been problem among the teenagers, so they lost their popularity. But it was a great strategy, because they stopped criticizing the party from the radical positions. I'd like to say that the change in politics showed certain political maturity of the young Czech political party, and they remained quite an important party, supported by business circles and national intellectuals, and it was one of the forming party of the future Czechoslovakia. So after introducing the universal suffrage, we had the first election. So there had been part of the latest election during the existence of the Austrian Empire. So 1907, the universal suffrage for men was introduced. Better reflection of democratic realities had been shown even among the Czech people, and young Czechs were supporting that, even though they were accepting losses in terms of their votes. There were other political parties. So one of the most important was Agrarian Party, which was opposing the universal suffrage, first of all, but under Antoni Schwehla, also one of the future leaders of Czechoslovakia. It changed their approach, and they started to be focused on the countryside with the slogan, "The countryside is one family." So they were trying to represent the entire rural population. There remained all Czechs as well, who based their politics upon Czech historical rights, but those were opposing the suffrage equality. Catholic parties, especially in Moravia, they consolidated under a Catholic People's Party, one of the or another important party also in Czechoslovak political system. They supported universal suffrage, but they were against the egalitarian approach in other spheres. And obviously there were young Czechs who cooperated with National Czech Council. So what were the results of the general election in Cisleitanian? So from Czech point of view, the dominant party became Agrarian Party under Švehla, and they were also Social Democrats. As you can see, young Czechs didn't succeed that much. It wasn't a total failure. On the other side, there were the Germans, Social Democrats, Agrarians, who got the majority of seats between the German parties. Masaryk returned to the parliament. He won for Realist. And then we can see that there was a strong fraction of socialists and clericals, strong social democrats, and there was also a club which was created with 83 seats, and German National Union, typically the German radicals. What we can see here is a decline of conservative gentry, which lost representation in lower chamber and had a limited position in House of Lords and provincial assemblies. So what was the post-election development? So ministers, the Czech ministers of the government resigned, and there was a rise of František Fiedler, as I mentioned, the expert in economics, so he became Minister of Commerce. So there was a division between Czech politicians. So the National Club, which was made by young Czech agrarian as clericals, was opposed by the radicals, who refused to join the alliance and remained out of the dominant political stream. And there were also challenges of the universal suffrage as such. So we can see that there was no place for resolving ethnical disputes, but rather amplification, so rise of tensions among ethnic groups, because the radicals entered the parliament in greater numbers and they oppose each other. And what we can see in such a parliament is that there was a loss of efficiency. So new deputies hindered the parliamentary efficiency, having different opinions, and there was no place for agreement. So what's happened was that parliament became much more heterogeneous, and the effectiveness has been lost. So the parliament increasingly relied on concessions to pass legislation, and it the advancement in terms of the democracy meant reducing its effectiveness. So that's for today, and we will continue later with the situation before the war.